I'm Professor Campagna, and I want to welcome you to this session. Just to let you know that it will be an interactive session. So as Stephen mentioned, you have a Q&A box down at the bottom. If you have questions, just put them in there, and throughout the session, we will address them. And throughout the session, I will also be asking you to engage by answering questions in chat. So for today, we're going to dig into a couple of different topics after we introduce one another. We'll talk about the Hult experience to give you a sense of what it's like working in a Hult classroom or dialing into working in a Hult classroom. We're going to talk about this notion of grit and some of the personal skills that we might want to consider developing to build resilience and grit. And then finally, we'll end with one promise that I'm going to ask each of us to make to ourselves. And so to kick it off, I'm Professor Campagna, and I'm a professor of practice at Hult International Business School. I started off with an undergraduate degree from a university here in the US, and then worked my way to an MBA in international business, and have also completed some doctoral work. I'm a certified management consultant, so after my journey through about a dozen years or so working in technology companies, I started my own consulting practice. So you'll notice that a lot of the Hult faculty combine work in the field as practitioners together with their teaching. My area of focus has primarily been in the areas of marketing and sales, leadership development, and operational excellence. In 1997, I also started teaching at the university level, and I've taught at local area universities in the New England area here. I'm located outside of Boston, Massachusetts. So I do teach on the Boston campus. And I've been with Hult now for, I'm going into my 7th year. I mentioned that I started my company in 1997. It's a business management consulting firm called Blue Sage. And most of the companies that I've worked with have been global organizations, primarily technology companies, but I've also worked in healthcare and services industries. Now, one of the things that's nice about this is when we work with our students, we also are able to share access to our networks. For example, I teach a course, a consulting course in the summer. It's an elective, and I actually bring in companies and their consulting projects, and teams of students work with the companies. They learn a methodology for consulting, and they deliver real value to these organizations. I mentioned that I've been with Hult now for 7 years, and I teach a variety of courses, international business, strategy. I teach in the master's program for the leadership curriculum, and have also taught other marketing courses, and I mentioned the consulting elective. We're continually refining our core curriculum, updating it with fresh cases, new pedagogy, different tools, and especially now with our limitless learning, the ability for our students to start courses wherever they're located, and then to transition into the classroom when they are able to do so. Many of our faculty are very, very involved in activities that our students undertake throughout the 1 or 2 years that they're with us. Myself, I advise the consulting club, the Women in Business Club. There's a business management consulting club, and I've also worked with teams of students who are working on projects outside of Hult, such as the IXL Innovation Olympics and master's theses. So we're very interactive and supportive of our student body. I'm also focused in the area of research on topics around women in leadership, teams, how teams come together, how the formation of teams affects their performance, their effectiveness, and then also working with entrepreneurs to develop their businesses, especially in different regions of the world, such as the Middle East. So a recent case study of mine focused on a female entrepreneur who started a consulting firm about 15 years ago at the age of 28. So that's a bit about my formal credentials. So when we ask someone, tell me about yourself, it's the usual, this is who I am, this is my experience, these are my areas of focus, my education perhaps. But it's also important to get an idea of the other aspects of who we are. So I'd like to share a little known fact about myself. If you're in my classroom, pretty soon you'll realize that you'll hear me talking a lot about gardening. I'm a crazy gardener, not only flowers, perennials, but also I've been trying vegetables. So tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce. This year I just went crazy with basil. And so a lot of pesto was created and consumed in my house. And of course you have to take the zucchini and make it into breads and other sorts of delicacies that we enjoy. So this is one of my passions. So I'd like to get a sense now of who we have on the call and understand a little bit more about you. So if you would enter in the chat, if you would tell us where you're from, and also tell us what is your passion. So you'll find the chat down on the bottom. Don't be shy. Hello, Shivansh. And so your name, where you're from, and what is your passion? We've got somebody here. Okay. Genevieve from Switzerland, passion is people. Interesting. Okay. Kayaking, wonderful. Excellent. Kindness, love, and sharing English, I'm sorry, while still learning other languages. Birmingham in the UK, I lived in Solihull for a while in the Midlands. So we've got a fitness fanatic here. Wonderful. We have an art lover. Miri, my passion is space. What kind of space, Miri? Outer space or spatial space? Fitness and photography. So we have art, we have fitness, taking care of people. Hello, Eric from Vancouver, connecting people. So it seems like we have a lot of people related passions here. Very interesting. Now consider if you were all in the same cohort at Hult, how you might develop a really great network. Photography, travel, kayaking, running trails, gardening, a fellow gardener out there. Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Oh, goodness, we've got a lot more. Oh, cooking. Yes, the cooking. Aha. Community participation and engagement. Wonderful. Thank you folks very much for sharing your passions, and welcome everyone. And as you can see, we really have a number of different nationalities and cultures, age ranges. We always find quite a range of years of experience in business. And that's one thing that you'll see in the classrooms at Hult is a real diverse mix of students that you can learn from and you can learn with. So welcome everyone. And I'd like to kind of shift gears a bit and talk next about our topic for today. There's an opportunity that we have these days to do a reset. There's so much change going on in the world. We're all experiencing it differently, depending on where we are or our life's experience, our history, our family, our culture. And I'd like to talk about grit, and I'm going to read the definition of grit, which is courage and resolve. It's strength of character. And Dr. Angela Duckworth, she looks at grit by breaking it down into subcomponents. She's focused on the area of perseverance and passion, self-control, and a positive mindset. Now, recent studies have shown that amongst university students, there's a correlation between these three subcomponents and their results. So passion and perseverance, what does that mean? Well, that means having short and long-term goals. So that's the perseverance part. Being resilient, being dedicated, having endurance. If we look at the component of self-control, that has to do with being self-aware and emotional intelligence. Managing our time and being able to prioritize the work that we do when we manage our time. Being able to determine what our strengths are, what our weaknesses are. You may have heard of a tool called a SWOT analysis. That's often used in business to look at the strengths and weaknesses, the opportunities and the threats of a business. I like to look at a personal SWOT and encourage students to say, what are my strengths and how can I look for opportunities to take advantage of those strengths? And then look at my personal weaknesses and determine what are the areas of weakness, how do I minimize those so that they don't become threats? So that's all in the subcomponent of self-control. And then we come to mindset. So positive mindset, that's really our attitude toward learning. What do we think about learning? Do we seek feedback? Do we offer feedback? Do we look at different ways to work with constructive criticism in the interest of developing a positive mindset? And Dr. Duckworth defines grit as perseverance and passion for long-term goals. So it's really working strenuously towards overcoming challenges. So I'd like you to think about, where do you see yourself right now in terms of these three subcomponents and your ability to cultivate grit? So give that a thought or two. And I see that there are some questions popping up, which we will get to in a moment. Okay, so now that you've reflected a bit, I'd like you to think about your resilience and your grit and consider the changes that we're going through in life today. And in the chat box, I'd like you to share with us, how does change and transition make you feel? How does it make you feel? I see excited. Excited and anxious, okay. Depends on the context. Yes, indeed. Every time I ask that question, I get that feedback. I feel like a baby. Excited but nervous at the same time. Times are uncertain, but I feel positive about the future. And it's possible to feel those emotions both at the same time. One of the things we're going to talk about is how do you recognize when you're feeling both of those at the same time? Hopeful. Feel like I need to help people. There's an element of control. It's an important point. Okay, maybe I'm reassessing my situation. Maybe I stand back. Change always brings something good. Wonderful. So we can continue thinking about grit and thinking about placing ourselves in the moment right now and considering passion and perseverance, self-control, and positive mindset. And we've had to do a lot of this type of reflection and adjustment, most recently during times of learning in the new normal. And so since last March, we've been teaching in hybrid classrooms. And so in the upper left here, you see, this was in the summertime where I had a class of students. This was a leadership class, and we were all on campus. And we've invited our students to come into the classroom or physically or to Zoom in and rotate through as they are able to. So this whole notion of learning in the new normal, how do we do that? What are some of the skills that we can develop to become more resilient so that we can move gracefully through change? Now, some of this has to do with the mindset. So I'd like you to consider what you think about a positive mindset, or what are your thoughts about the type of mindset that's required to be able to cultivate grit during these times of change? And Stephen, I'd like to ask you if you could put up the poll, if you don't mind.
Yeah, here we go.
Thank you. So please read through these questions and select one.
All right, it's looking good. Some people are still making their minds. So we have 50%. So the last people, please vote. What is your choice? All right, so last choices, please.
Boy, we've got a quick bunch here.
Okay, so 3, 2, 1. All right, so I'm sharing the results and they're pretty good.
All right, so what do you think about mindset? So nobody voted for the comment that your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much. So that's good to see. You can learn new things, but you can't really change how intelligent you are. So we've got 15% picked that one. And then the last two are somewhat similar. No matter how much intelligence you have, you can always change it quite a bit. And then if you take that even a bit further, you can always substantially change how intelligent you are. So these are viewpoints that you all have about mindset. So Dr. Carol Dweck out of the University of Pennsylvania, she coined a term called growth mindset. And I want to explore that a little bit with you. First, we'll start by looking at what we call a fixed mindset. And that's when one believes that their potential can't be changed. So I like to use the example of playing tennis. I'm not a very good tennis player, and I come from a family that has 4 siblings that play tennis, and I've always been the worst. In a fixed mindset, I might ignore the fact that I'm not a good tennis player, and I might think, well, I'll never get good, even though my family tries to coach me and has over the years. I might go as far as saying, I'm never going to try tennis again. So looking at this as a failure, saying that I can't do it, ignoring the input from others. Those are all symbols of a fixed mindset. So what Dr. Dweck talks about is the fact that if our beliefs are that learning intelligence and intelligence can be developed, we can in fact build a growth mindset. And it's based on the belief that if we work hard, we can improve. And that talent is just the first step. But if we get feedback and input and constructive criticism, if we look for lessons and practice best practices that we see in others, those can all help to develop a growth mindset. So it's this notion of growth mindset. So if I had a growth mindset with regard to playing tennis, I might say, you know, I'm not as good as the rest of my family, but with some practice, I may be able to get better. And having that dialogue of encouraging myself and motivating myself. Now, there's this notion of, okay, some of this I can do myself. I can control it, but there are some things that I just can't control whatsoever. So how do I look at that? And so during challenging times of transition, you can maintain resilience and effectiveness by focusing your efforts on the things that you can control. So if you look on the right, this is what we call the circle of control. In terms of playing tennis, what can I control? Well, I can control if I practice or not. I can control the type of equipment I use. I can control how often I practice. There are certain things that I can do that I can control. Can I influence other people to help me improve my game of tennis? Well, I could potentially by asking them to coach me, having them give me feedback. My sister is a tennis coach, so I could bother her every day and ask her can influence her to work with me. But can I become the best tennis player in the world? No, that's something I might be concerned about, but I may not be able to accomplish being the best tennis player in the world. But again, I can focus on controlling that which is within my circle of control. So this is what we call effective effort. And if we spend our time looking at what we can control and influence and not thinking about those things that we can't control or influence, it's a way of motivating ourselves and not getting frustrated. There's another piece to this. Dr. Martin Seligman, a renowned psychologist and researcher, he's been studying optimists and pessimists for decades. And what Dr. Seligman says is that we can motivate ourselves by looking at how we approach challenges. How do you react to a challenge? How you handle stress and setbacks. We can look at our reaction to challenges and stress and setbacks and use that as a way to motivate ourselves. And by cultivating optimism, it helps to increase our resilience and keep us going and motivate ourselves, especially during challenging times. He talks about the explanatory style. So the explanatory style is how you explain things that happen to you. Do you look at them as permanent, or do you look at them as just something that is temporary? And so how you explain why events happen that can help to determine your level of motivation and optimism. So optimism is something that you can control, and you can learn it by really zeroing in on your explanatory style. So for example, in the last session that we had, somebody asked a question and they said, well, how does this work when it comes to looking for a job? Because it's very frustrating, and 99% of the resumes that I send out, I don't hear from, etc. So if you consider the explanatory style, one way of looking at it is the pessimistic way, which is to say, I've sent out 180 resumes. I've only gotten 2 responses. I'll never get a job. The other way of looking at it is to say, I've sent out 180 resumes. I've only gotten 3 responses. And I've gone back and really looked at my resume and tested it with some people that I know, especially in the Career Center. And I've made some changes to it. And I know that those 3 are only the first 3, because there will be more responses that will come from it. So how do you explain why events happen? That's your choice, one way or the other. So think about how we motivate ourselves by the way that we look at challenges and how we explain how events or why events happen. So these are a couple of the skills I'm introducing here that can help us to cultivate grit during times of transition. And there's another piece that I'd like to offer to us here. This is based on chickens. So Judge Jim Tam, he is a retired judge out in California. And he spends a lot of time working with teams on collaboration and workplace alignment. And he talks a lot about chickens because he says that they can teach us about vulnerability. So what does that mean? There's actually a great TED Talk that he's done, if you ever want to look it up, Judge Jim Tam. But he's done some research and he discovered what he called red zone chickens and green zone chickens. So by looking at chickens and their behavior, he noticed that red zone chickens were ones that were very aggressive towards other chickens. And their egg production was 3 times less than the egg production of what he called the green zone chicken. The green zone chickens got along with each other. They weren't aggressive towards each other. And as he observed the chickens, he determined that there was one thing that the red zone chickens had in common, and that was defensiveness. Because when the red zone chickens got defensive, they started to attack each other, physically attack each other. So think about this analogy and think about this research when you're discussing chickens, and now move it into a workplace environment. Think about when you get defensive. What happens? How do you feel? What is the reason for your defensiveness? Now I'd like to ask you this on the next slide, to really reflect on times when you have been defensive or you have felt vulnerable. And what has been your behavior? So let's start with the first question, which is, when I'm defensive, and fill in that sentence. So when I am defensive, Make a foolproof plan to make myself feel safe. Okay. Guided by emotion so I don't disappoint others. I try to protect the solution. I look for different ways to improve. I become courageous. I act abruptly. Yes, please answer in chat. So when I'm defensive, I stop communicating. I'm rude to my teammates. I fight back. So these are some personal characteristics that we want to be aware of in terms of how we might come across in a defensive situation. Second question, what are the different ways to overcome defensiveness when working with others? And we see this quite a bit. I see this working with my clients. I see it across organizations, also at school, that teams and individuals try to overcome defensiveness and they struggle to do so. So what are some of the different ways that you might overcome your defensiveness? So I realize I'm getting angry and I stop talking. What might you do to overcome defensiveness? Okay, work as a team. How might you work as a team? Use empathy, okay? Put yourself into somebody else's shoes. Take a step back, wait before reacting. So it could be stopping and observing what's going on in the moment. Listen, so listening and actively questioning one another. Calming myself down, okay? And then the final question will be, how will you achieve this? If you take a look at the signals, your early warning system of when you're defensive, and you know what that is, and then you start to think about what are different ways you can overcome defensiveness. What are specific actions that you might be able to take? So think about that. And this is the sort of input that might go into a personal development plan. And now one of the models that we use to help shape a personal development plan is what we call the Hult DNA leadership development model. It's a competency framework that has been developed based on research, based on interviews with employers, based on work with alumni who have gone out into the workforce and have come back and said, you know, these are the leadership skills, the personal and professional skills that employers are looking for. And so there are 3 different competencies that we work on in the Hult DNA. The thinking competency, of course, that has to do with being self-aware and being socially aware. This is emotional intelligence. So how might I develop those skills? And this can help us to work on embracing change so that when we move from one country to another or one job to another, or we're dealing with stress situations, that we could do it in a way that isn't as stressful as the last time. On the communicating competency, this is about not just speaking and listening, but doing it skillfully, doing it in a way that that is really productive and can move our team forward, for example, on a project. And then persuasion and influence, we work on developing those skills as well. And then finally, I mentioned teams quite a bit. So team building is a competency, and especially working across diverse teams, across time zones, and across locations. So how might you foster relationships? And that doesn't mean avoiding conflict, but in fact, it means using conflict constructively in order to build relationships. So these are the 3 different competencies that are in the Hult DNA leadership skills model. So I'd like to ask each of you to think about, if you were to start working on your personal development plan, and it's actually a written plan that includes areas that you want to work on, the specific goals that you want to set for yourself, an action plan that you might set over a period of time. So if you were going to start a personal development plan, which of these 3 skills would you want to work on first and why? And put your answer in the chat. Okay, why? So I see communicating, team building, and I'm curious about your selections. Okay, great. Wonderful. A lot of organization people avoid constructive conflict or discussions that don't help teams grow together. So, you know, conflict is really at the crossroads where assertion and cooperation meet. So it's a level that one party asserts themselves and cooperates, and how that compares to another party. So it doesn't always mean controversy and destructive conflict. Okay. So team building to learn how to better resolve workplace conflict. See a lot around conflict, communications, presentation skills. We do a lot of work around presentation skills and communications, business communications, thinking first. Great, good feedback here. So now the next question would be, out of all of these, consider what is one action step that you can take. What is one action step that you can take to cultivate grit? We've talked a lot today about a number of different topics. We've talked about optimism and pessimism. We've talked about being defensive. We've introduced the idea of a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. We've talked about the 3 subcomponents that factor into grit. Then we also talked about effective effort and looking at what we can control and influence as compared to what is outside of our circle of control. So name one action step that you might take to cultivate grit. And you might want to start the sentence with, I will, and then put it in the chat. Okay, so maybe, okay, one action step. Think fully and process my thoughts before responding. Being aware of that moment when you pause before responding. Try it. Wait 2 or 3 seconds before you respond and practice doing that. It's a very interesting technique. I'll make myself more self-controlled, allocate time for self-education, self-improvement. Awareness about my skills, that's a very important point. Sometimes we're not aware of our skills, and we're not aware of how the world sees our skills. And this is where input and feedback can come in. We do a couple of assessments in the leadership program to help us to really understand what our baseline of skills is. And then from there, we can work on developing and leveraging the skills that we have. So I'd like to make a comment here then is, you know, there are a lot of choices out there. There are a lot of choices that we can make that they don't always look as delicious and inviting as these desserts here, but it's really within our circle of control to decide which of the choices that we would like to make in developing our skills and learning how to cultivate grit in any situation, and especially during times of transition. And so with that, I'd like to invite any comments or questions that you might have about anything that we've talked about. And again, this session has been primarily focused on our personal and professional skills development, but I'm also open to answer any questions about consulting or strategy or marketing or any of the other areas. So please put your questions in the Q&A.